I'd been at Stratmore Solutions for almost a decade. 9 years, 7 months, and 4 days to be exact. Not that I was counting. Back when I first walked into that old brick warehouse in downtown Denver, we were just 15 people with big dreams and empty pockets. Employee number 8, they called me. I wore it like a badge of honor. I had watched that company grow from a scrappy startup to a regional powerhouse, bringing in clients who had never even heard of us before I picked up the phone. It wasn't just sales numbers on a spreadsheet for me. It was personal. My clients weren't just account numbers. They were friends, old college roommates who'd launched startups, groomsmen from my wedding who now ran procurement departments. I knew their birthdays, their kids' names, even their favorite whiskey. That's how I built my book of business, by actually giving a damn. For 7 straight years, I'd been the top performer at Stratmore, responsible for over 60% of total revenue. My office walls were lined with top performer plaques, gathering dust but standing as silent witnesses to what I'd helped build. To anyone on the outside, it looked perfect. But inside the walls of Stratmore, things were changing. It started 3 months ago during our quarterly review. The CEO stood up, cleared his throat, and introduced the newest addition to the executive team, Derek Shaw, our new Vice President of Sales. Harvard-educated, fresh off some Silicon Valley firm with a name I'd never heard of. He wore the kind of smile you only see in business magazines, polished, plastic, and stretched just a little too wide. Derek's going to revolutionize our sales strategy, the CEO had announced, practically beaming. We're talking disruption, innovation, aggressive scaling. I'd heard that kind of talk before, usually from people who had never actually closed a deal themselves. Derek spent the next 30 minutes quoting Harvard Business Review, talking about client acquisition funnels and synergistic outreach strategies. I remember looking around the room and seeing glazed eyes, half-hidden yawns. But Derek spoke like he was delivering a TED Talk. 2 weeks later, he called a sales team meeting, his first one. The conference room was packed. Derek at the head of the table. Projection screen lit up with slides that looked like they were pulled straight from a business textbook. He started talking about cold outreach quotas, automated client engagement, and script-based pitches. Relationships are important, he'd said, flashing that too wide smile. But we can't scale relationships. We need numbers, we need efficiency, we need results. That was the moment I knew he didn't get it. Relationships weren't just part of the job for me, they were the job. But I kept my mouth shut, kept my eyes on the slides, and nodded when he looked in my direction. Derek didn't like that I didn't play into his excitement. I could see it in the way he glanced at me, like I was some relic of the past that he couldn't wait to replace. I'd been through VPs before, some good, some not so good. But I'd always managed to adapt, to find a way to make it work. This time felt different. I didn't have to wait long to find out just how different it would be. I was in my office running through my quarterly report when Derek walked in. No knock, no announcement, just strolled right in like he owned the place. He stood there with that half smirk I'd come to recognize, arms crossed over his tailored suit. "We're going in a different direction," he said, his voice slick with corporate confidence. "Thanks for everything, but we need people who fit the new model." I stared at him for a moment, processing the words. I didn't argue. Didn't plead my case by mentioning that I'd just closed the most successful quarter in company history. Didn't point out that I'd personally brought in 60% of total revenue. I didn't even ask what the new model meant. I just stood up, grabbed my jacket, and looked him in the eye. "Got it. Best of luck," I said. For a second, I almost thought I saw disappointment in his eyes, like he was expecting an outburst, maybe even hoping for one. Something to justify whatever story he'd planned to tell about me after I left. But I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. I walked out calmly, leaving my collection of plaques in the cabinet behind me. 7 years of achievement gathering. Let him keep them. I stepped out of Derek's office and walked back to my desk, my footsteps heavy but deliberate. I had always imagined that if I ever left Stratmore Solutions, it would be on my own terms. An announcement party, a few handshakes, maybe even a farewell speech. Not like this. Not after the most successful quarter the company had ever seen. My office was quiet. Too quiet. I could feel the eyes of my colleagues pressing against my back, but when I turned, they were locked on their screens, fingers tapping away at keyboards with sudden urgency. Nobody made eye contact. It was like I'd contracted something contagious. Failure, maybe. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the essentials. Personal photos, a half-empty bottle of bourbon I'd saved for late nights, the coffee mug my wife gave me on my first day. Make today count. I smirked at the irony. Apparently, my days stopped counting about an hour ago. I moved efficiently, not lingering on the plaques or awards that lined my cabinet. Top sales executive, client relationship, excellence most valuable employee. 7 years of recognition now collecting dust. Derek probably expected me to fight back, to argue, to beg for my place in the new vision he'd crafted from behind his executive desk. I knew better. Men like him always planned for resistance. They always had a speech ready for when. You tried to plead your case, but I wasn't about to give him the satisfaction. I left the plaques there. Let them be a reminder of what I'd built. Maybe one day, when Derek walked by my empty office, he'd remember that every one of those awards meant something, but I doubted it. He didn't strike me as the reflective type. I slipped my belongings into a box, placed my jacket over my shoulder, and walked down the hallway. HR had clearly been prepped for my exit. The woman behind the desk avoided my eyes but slid the exit checklist toward me with a well-practiced smile. Hi, Mr. Caldwell. I just need you to sign here and here. This is for the laptop return, your company phone, and your key card. I signed the forms without a word. She continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. Your non-compete clause is valid for 6 months. You're aware of that, right? I nodded. I had seen the clause 1,000 times. It was practically boilerplate, standard legalese to make sure I couldn't walk across the street to a competitor with all my contacts. But that's the thing about relationships. They don't exist on spreadsheets or in CRM software. They're not locked away in corporate handbooks. I handed her the laptop, the phone, and my ID badge. For a moment, her eyes softened. Good luck with everything, Ryan, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. There was regret in her tone, a sincerity that made me pause. Appreciate it, I replied, and for a second I almost meant it. I stepped into the elevator alone, the doors closing with a soft whoosh that felt strangely final. I pressed the button for the ground floor and watched the numbers light up one by one, descending like a countdown. I wasn't angry, not exactly. I was clear. There's a difference. Anger is messy, impulsive. This was something colder, sharper. As the elevator hummed its way down, I leaned against the metal railing and thought about Derek Shaw. He'd walked into Stratmore with his shiny new title and his Silicon Valley buzzwords, thinking he was going to reinvent the wheel. He saw everything in numbers and graphs, but I saw people. That was his mistake. The elevator chimed, and the doors slid open to the lobby. The receptionist, a young woman named Lila, who always smiled a little too, wide glanced up and her face fell. Leaving early today, Mr. Caldwell? She asked, her voice laced with nervousness. Yeah, early retirement, I replied with a smirk. Her eyes went wide, but I didn't stick around for the follow-up questions. I pushed through the glass doors and walked into the brisk Denver air. The walk to my car felt longer than usual. Maybe it was the weight of the box I carried, or maybe it was the realization of what I'd just left behind. Years of building relationships, of securing deals. Not just because of numbers, but because of trust. My clients weren't just names on a ledger. They were people. People I knew, people I had built with, grown with. Brian, my biggest client, had been my college roommate. Jason was a groomsman at my wedding. Allison, the head of logistics at Trolla Freight, had been a referral from my brother-in-law. To Derek, these were just numbers on a spreadsheet. To me, they were people who trusted me, not because of Stratmore, but because of who I was. I loaded the box into the back seat of my car, dusted off my hands, and leaned against the roof. I wasn't done, not by a long shot. If Derek thought he could just sever those relationships with a non-compete clause and a corporate handshake, he was sorely mistaken. Just as I climbed into the driver's seat, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced at the screen. A text from Brian. "You free for lunch tomorrow?" I smiled for the first time that day. I fired back a quick reply. "Absolutely." As I pulled out of the parking lot, I didn't feel defeated. I felt determined. Derek had no idea what he'd just started. When you get fired, people expect you to disappear. They imagine you sitting in some dark apartment, drinking cheap whiskey, scrolling through job boards with shaking hands. But I wasn't about to give Derek that satisfaction. Instead, I did the opposite. I went out. I spent the next few weeks attending every networking event I could find. Business luncheons, charity fundraisers, even those god-awful speed networking events where you exchange business cards with a dozen strangers in under an hour. I didn't care. I was building something, slowly, silently, with the kind of patience that only comes from having nothing left to lose. My first lunch was with Brian. He picked a corner table at our usual spot downtown, a steakhouse with leather booths, and walls lined with photographs of long-dead business tycoons. He waved me over, his smile as wide as ever. "Didn't think I'd be seeing you under these circumstances," he said, extending his hand. Neither did I. I shook it firmly and slid into the booth. He didn't waste time. "What the hell happened? Last I checked, you were running the place." I leaned back, running my fingers along the polished wood of the table. New VP came in, Harvard guy, wanted to shake things up. I was part of the shaking. Brian snorted. "Idiots. So what's next?" I smiled. "That's what I wanted to talk to you about." Over the next month, I scheduled more lunches, more coffees, more late-night drinks than I had in years. Jason, Allison, Dave, one by one, I met with them all. We didn't talk about my exit, not directly. We talked about their businesses, their pain points, the way Stratmore was handling their accounts now that I was gone. I just asked questions and let them fill the silence. Without me there to smooth things over, cracks had started to show. Missed follow-ups, overcomplicated contracts, and worst of all, impersonal service. One client said she hadn't heard from her new account manager in over a month. Another complained about multiple reps being assigned to the same project. Nobody knew who was in charge. Derek had replaced relationships with metrics and quotas, and it showed. It was during one of these late-night networking events that I ran into Jessica Lane. We had crossed paths before at industry conferences, back when I still had a nameplate on my office door. She was now the VP of sales at Titan Industries, Stratmore's biggest competitor. Jessica was sharp, the kind of sharp that makes you want to check for stab wounds after you shake her hand. She saw me from across the room, gave me a nod, and walked over, glass of wine in her hand. "Didn't expect to see you here, Ryan," she said, eyebrow raised. "Didn't expect to be here," I replied. "Life's funny like that," she smirked. "Word on the street is that Stratmore's been stumbling." I raised my glass. Can't say I'm surprised. Jessica leaned in just a little closer. "You got time for a drink?" I looked at my watch, then back at her. "I've got time for two." We ended up at a rooftop bar overlooking the city skyline, the lights of downtown Denver flickering against the night sky. Jessica got straight to the point. "Titan's been wanting to expand its footprint for a while. You built quite the portfolio over there. I'm guessing those clients are less than thrilled with the recent changes." I took a sip of whiskey and smiled. That's an understatement. "What if I told you Titan is interested in adopting those relationships?" she asked. "Adopting?" I raised an eyebrow. "You know what I mean. I'm talking full client transition. Titan's got the infrastructure, but we don't have the personal connections. You, on the other hand." I nodded slowly. "I'm listening." Jessica slid a folder across the table. Consulting agreement was stamped across the top. I opened it up and read the highlights. Competitive salary, flexible terms, and, most importantly, no direct client poaching. Everything had to be above board. No aggressive outreach, just availability. If my former clients wanted to reach out, I could respond, and I knew they would. You'd be running strategic relationships, Jessica continued. Full autonomy. Build it however you want. No quotas, no scripts, just relationships. I closed the folder and set it down. And Stratmore, her eyes gleamed. We let them burn themselves out. I reached out my hand. You've got yourself a deal. Within weeks, I was officially on Titan's payroll. Not as an account executive, but as a consulting director of strategic relationships. My title didn't matter. What mattered was that I was back in the game. I started simple. Networking events, conference calls, lunch meetings. I didn't have to poach clients. They came to me one by one, with complaints about service, missed deadlines, unreturned calls. I just listened and nodded, offering nothing more than a sympathetic ear and a reminder that I was still around. The first major transition was Brian's company. He called me late one night, voice tired and frustrated. These guys don't know what they're doing, Ryan. It's like they've never even met me. They probably haven't, I replied calmly. Think you can do better? I smiled. I know I can. We set up the transition papers the next morning. Titan absorbed his company's accounts seamlessly. No glitches, no errors, just smooth service and real communication. Word spread. Jason's health tech startup was next, then Allison's freight company. One by one, they trickled over, slowly, but steadily. And just like that, Derek Shaw's spreadsheet started bleeding red. A plan is only as good as its execution. I wasn't interested in loud revenge or dramatic outbursts. That's not my style. The best kind of revenge is the kind they never see coming, the kind that makes them question every decision they've made until the very end. I started small, real small. Quiet lunches with old friends, former clients, and a few new faces who had been introduced to me through whispers and referrals. I kept it casual, all smiles and handshakes, as if I was just catching up. How's Stratmore treating you? I would ask, genuinely curious. The answers were almost always the same. It's different. That's corporate speak for it's going downhill fast. Missed emails, phone calls that were never returned, account managers that couldn't remember key project details. It was exactly what I expected. Derek had replaced relationship building with spreadsheets and quotas, and it was finally starting to show. I didn't have to say much. The clients were smart enough to connect the dots themselves. A lot of them had worked with me for years. They trusted me. So when I mentioned that I'd moved over to Titan Industries and was now overseeing strategic client relationships, the questions practically asked themselves. How's Titan handling things over there? One would ask. Better than Stratmore, I'll tell you that much, I'd reply, taking a slow sip of my coffee. By the end of every lunch, they'd slip me a business card, eyes full of understanding. If anything opens up, let me know. And I always did. One night, I hosted a private dinner at a little Italian place just outside Denver. Nothing fancy, just good food, a few bottles of wine, and about a dozen of my old clients. I called it a networking event. In truth, it was an opportunity to do something much more powerful, compare stories. I didn't have to prompt them. They just started talking. One client described how Stratmore had added hidden service fees to his latest invoice. Another mentioned that their new account manager had completely botched a quarterly review, losing them a crucial distribution deal. And then there was Allison from Trala Freight, who said she'd been charged for a premium support package she never even agreed to. I just sat back and listened as the stories piled up. When the wine glasses were empty and the plates cleared, they all just sort of stared at each other, realization dawning. They weren't isolated incidents. This was systemic. The next morning, I made a few calls. I had always kept in touch with Jamie, an old friend who now worked as a consultant specializing in corporate compliance. Over coffee, I mentioned a few things I'd heard. Hidden fees, delayed contracts, service charges without documentation. Her eyes lit up with that familiar gleam she got whenever she smelled corporate blood. You get me the documentation, she said, leaning forward, and I'll tell you exactly how deep this rabbit hole goes. It didn't take much. A few phone calls, a couple of casual email threads, and my inbox started filling up. Copies of invoices with mystery fees, email chains of ignored support tickets, even internal memos forwarded anonymously. People love to talk when they're angry, and Derek had made a lot of people angry. It was Brian's company that made the first move. A few weeks after our initial lunch, he called me up. "Ryan, I'm done," he said, no hesitation in his voice. "I'm pulling everything from Stratmore." I wasn't surprised. I had known Brian since college. He wasn't the kind of guy to tolerate incompetence. "You have someone lined up for the transition?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. "I was hoping you'd make the introduction." 2 days later, I walked him into the Titan Industries main office. Jessica greeted him personally, shook his hand, and by the end of the week, Brian's entire account was transferred. No hiccups, no issues, just seamless quality service, the way it should have been at Stratmore. It didn't stop there. Word spread fast. Jason from Health Secure, Allison from Tralla Freight, Dave from Iron Tech Manufacturing, they all followed. They weren't being stolen, they were leaving. Walking out the door on their own because the one thing that had kept them loyal was gone. The first time I saw Derek Shaw stumble was at a regional sales conference. He was standing by the coffee table, surrounded by a few junior reps who looked like they were listening out of obligation more than interest. He caught my eye and forced a smile that didn't touch his eyes. "Ryan," he said, walking over with his hand extended. "Heard you've been keeping busy." I shook his hand, matching his smile with my own. "I'm making do," I replied casually. He leaned in just a bit, voice dropping to a whisper. "You know, poaching clients could be a violation of your non-compete." I chuckled, sipping my coffee. "Who's poaching?" I replied. "They're just leaving, Derek. You can't hold on to what you don't value." For a second, I saw panic. His jaw clenched, and I watched as his eyes darted around the room like he was counting heads, calculating numbers. He had spreadsheets. I had relationships. He knew it, I knew it, and now the board knew it too. Jessica called me a week later. "I just got a very interesting phone call," she said, amusement clear in her voice. "A board member at Stratmore just asked if Titan would be interested in a strategic acquisition." I nearly dropped the phone. "They're selling?" "Not yet," she replied. "But they're bleeding, Ryan. Your old friend Derek is about 2 bad quarters away from a full board vote. I didn't need to hear any more." The plan was working, slowly, silently, and effectively. I had always believed that the best way to bring down an empire was from the inside. Derek had built his on metrics and quotas. Mine was built on loyalty and trust. One was crumbling. The other was only getting stronger. There's a certain poetic rhythm to watching a house burn, especially when you helped stack the kindling. It wasn't sabotage. I hadn't orchestrated any grand schemes or whispered falsehoods into ears. I had simply stepped back and let Derek Shaw's incompetence handle the rest. I was sitting in Jessica's office at Titan Industries when she leaned back in her chair and slid a folder across the desk. Her nails tapped lightly on the manila surface, a smile playing at the corner of her mouth. "I think it's time," she said simply. I opened the folder and stared at the bold black letters across the header. "Acquisition Proposal, Stratmore, Solutions." My fingers traced the embossed Titan logo on the top right corner, and I couldn't help but chuckle. "He's finally ready to sell?" I asked, not even trying to hide my amusement. Jessica smirked. "The board is. He's just finding out now." The boardroom at Stratmore Solutions hadn't changed much since I'd last walked its halls. Same glass walls, same uncomfortable chairs, same smell of old carpet and desperation. But this time, I wasn't sitting with the account executives. I was at the far end of the table, dressed sharper than I had ever been during my days there. Beside me sat Jessica Lane, cool and composed as always. Derek walked in late, shoulders back, chin high, but his eyes darted nervously around the room. He was putting on a performance, one last act of confidence before the curtain fell. His gaze swept over the room, pausing when it landed on me. I saw the flicker of confusion, the way his brows knit together like he was trying to piece together a puzzle that just wouldn't fit. I leaned back in my chair, offering him the most casual nod I could muster. "Good to see you, Derek." He didn't return it. Instead, he took his seat at the head of the table and cleared his throat. I understand. We're here to discuss some restructuring options, he began, the arrogance still lacing his voice. Jessica spoke up smoothly. Not restructuring, acquisition. The color drained from his face. I'm sorry? Acquisition, she repeated, sliding a thick folder across the table. Titan Industries is prepared to acquire Stratmore Solutions, effective immediately. Pending board approval. I watched Derek's hand shake slightly as he flipped through the first few pages. His eyes darted back up to me. You're with Titan? I smiled. Director of Strategic Relationships, I replied easily. I guess you could say I'm in charge of familiar faces. The meeting went on for hours. Derek fought, argued, and bluffed his way through every bullet point Jessica laid out. But the numbers weren't on his side. Revenue had dropped by 40%, client retention had plummeted, and Titan had swooped in to scoop up what Derek had squandered. What Derek didn't know, what the board had just realized, was that I had been sitting at the center of that exodus, moving key clients over to Titan, not by force but by choice. When it was finally time for the vote, the board members barely even glanced in his direction. One by one, they raised their hands. It was unanimous. Stratmore was ours. I watched Derek's face pale as Jessica leaned forward. You can clear out your office by end of day, she said smoothly. Security will escort you. He turned to me, eyes wild, voice shaking. You did this, I met his gaze calmly. You did this, Derek. I just made sure they saw it. Acquisitions are messy. They take weeks, sometimes months to finalize. But I made sure that during every step of the transition, my clients, my friends, were given priority service. Titan rolled out the red carpet, offering them better contracts, lower fees, and direct access to me. No waiting lines, no hold times. I even made a point to reach out personally to each of them. How's the new setup? Any problems, anything I can fix? The responses were always the same, smoother than ever. It was easy when you knew their kids' names, their birthdays, their favorite brands of whiskey. Derek never bothered to learn those things. One by one, the referrals started rolling in. It wasn't just about keeping old clients. It was about bringing in new ones. Word had gotten around that Titan wasn't just the competition, it was the upgrade. I was in my new office at Titan, a glass-walled corner suite with a view of downtown. Denver, when I got the call. Jessica's voice was light, almost musical. It's done. I stood up and walked over to the window. They finally let him go? Escorted him out an hour ago. Apparently, security had to step in. He tried to delete his emails. Rookie move. I chuckled. Guess he wasn't as prepared as he thought. Oh, and by the way, she continued, we're moving forward with the integration. You're going to be heading the new client relations division. Effective immediately. I turned from the window and leaned against the glass. Director, Executive Vice President. The words hung in the air for a moment. EVP. The title. Derek had always paraded around like a badge of honor, the same one he'd waved over my head when he fired me. Now, it was mine. On the first day of the new integration, I walked through the lobby of what used to be Stratmore Solutions. The nameplate had been swapped out. It now read Titan Industries, Denver branch. The place looked the same. Same. Walls, same lights, but it felt different. Lighter somehow. Employees nodded as I walked by, some nervous, some hopeful. I stopped outside what used to be Derek's office. It was empty now, just bare walls and a desk that looked too big for the space. They had even scrubbed his name off the door. Mr. Caldwell, a voice called from behind. I turned to see Jamie. From compliance, a folder in her hands. All the documents are here. Full client transition reports, no gaps. Everything's accounted for. I took the folder and flipped through it. Clean, organized, efficient. Just the way it should have been. I smiled at her. Looks good, Jamie. Keep up the good work. As she walked away, I stepped into the office, setting the folder down on the desk that used to belong to Derek Shaw. I sat in his chair, leaned back, and watched the Denver skyline from the window. It looked different somehow. Brighter. Maybe. It was just me. I took the elevator up to the 14th floor of what used to be Stratmore Solutions. Now the sleek silver letters that adorned the lobby read Titan Industries, Denver branch. It felt strange, walking through those glass doors again. The walls were repainted, the lights brighter, the carpets fresher, but the bones were the same. The receptionist, a young woman I didn't recognize, greeted me with a smile. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell." I nodded back. "Good morning." I took my time, strolling through the hallways that used to be my everyday life. Offices were filled, people chatting in doorways, work getting done. But something was different. There was life here. Real conversations, laughter even. The gloom that had hung over Stratmore's halls was gone, replaced with an energy I hadn't seen in years. I passed by my old office, now occupied by a new account manager, her desk already cluttered with files and photographs. She was on the phone, laughing about something with a client. I couldn't help but smile. Down the hall, I saw a familiar face. Jamie from compliance. She was speaking to a group of new hires, her hands animated as she explained their roles. She caught my eye and waved. "Ryan, they're actually letting me train people now. Can you believe that?" "I can," I replied with a grin. About time. I passed by Allison from Tralla Freight, now heading up logistics relations under Titan's new contract. Jason had his own office, his name on the door, part of a new division we'd created specifically for health tech startups. Dave was in procurement, negotiating deals that I knew would make him a king in his own right. People I had known for years were finally being treated with the respect they deserved. They weren't just numbers in a spreadsheet anymore. They were people with value, with stories, with purpose. That was the difference between Derek and me. He saw data points, I saw friends. He saw revenue charts, I saw relationships. And in the end, that was his downfall. He underestimated the power of genuine connection. I made my way back to the corner office, my office. The sunlight poured in through the massive glass windows, flooding the room with light. Denver stretched out in front of me, alive and moving, like it always had been. I took a breath, feeling the weight of it all lift from my shoulders. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence fill the room. Outside, I could hear the murmur of voices, the hum of conversation, the sound of a company finally thriving. I didn't need to ruin him. His own ignorance did that for me.